Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we will discuss the complex negotiations that are going on in Paris on climate change and how India, along with other developing countries, is trying to get the best deal for itself and for the developing countries on climate change so that they have enough carbon space for future development. And to discuss this issue, we have with us Mr. Shyam Saran, Chairman, Research and Information Systems, as well as Senior Fellow at the Center for Policy Research. But more importantly, on this issue, Mr. Shyam Saran was former Foreign Secretary and he was Chief Negotiator on climate change during the Manmohan Singh regime under UPA and was very active in negotiating on behalf of India at the Copenhagen ministerial meet in 2009, and he's the best person to tell us and talk about the complexities of climate change negotiations, as also what's going on in Paris now. Welcome to our show, Mr. Shyam Saran. So you were at Copenhagen and you were Chief Negotiator. You know what goes on between the various 150 countries, developed countries and developing countries, and how they jockey for a best deal. So tell me what's going on in Paris now, and you have written an article in the Indian Express, so I'll take that as a starting question, where you have cautioned India. And you've said that Indian negotiators need to hold their nerve and not give in to pressures which are obviously coming now from the US and the West on India, which must have been true even in Copenhagen when you were there.
Most certainly.
So please tell us, what is your sense? Is this a repeat of Copenhagen, or do you see something else happening?
Well, there is no repeat of Copenhagen as such, because my sense is that despite the complexities that you are talking about, it is likely that we will get a deal, mainly because the bar has been set very low.
Okay.
As you know, we have over the last several years finally acquiesced in what the United States has always wanted, which is that there should be some kind of a pledge and review system.
Okay.
So pledges to be made voluntarily and those pledges to be subjected to some kind of an international review, but no strict compliance.
No legally binding commitments.
Exactly. Yeah. So as far as the pledges are concerned, as you know, all countries, both developed as well as developing countries, have put forward their pledges, which are the INDCs as they are called. And at Paris, some decision will be taken as to how these will be reviewed in the future. At what intervals will they be reviewed? So some are talking about 5-year intervals, others are talking about 10-year intervals. So that remains to be seen. I do not see that as a major sticking point in the negotiations. I think what I was drawing attention to was the fact that suddenly at this point of time, we are being told, although this is a pledge and review system, but we must have a legally binding outcome.
Okay.
Okay. So if you have a legally binding outcome, how does that relate to something which is a voluntary system?
Okay.
Isn't it? I mean, if you say it is pledge and review and I voluntarily put forward what my contribution is going to be.
That's why you have expressed in your article, you have warned that so we should avoid a legally binding.
No, we should not. I have no problem with a legally binding outcome, but I need to know what this is all about. What is the legally binding outcome? Because from what it appears now, the Europeans want a legally binding treaty where the commitments also will be legally binding. Okay. And there should be some kind of a strict compliance procedure. I do not think that they will get this, because the United States of America
these voluntary commitments
to be converted into legal commitments,
binding. Okay.
Binding commitments. But I do not think that is possible. What the United States is willing to agree to is a treaty which will say at regular intervals countries should make pledges. And at regular intervals, these pledges in totality or individually should be subjected to some kind of an international review. Okay. So as to raise the level of ambition if that becomes necessary in view of what science is telling us.
Okay.
but the commitments themselves will not be binding. You know.
Okay.
And the third is just an ordinary decision of the conference of parties, which will not be legally binding.
Okay.
So we are looking at what is the nature of the legal document or non-legal document which will emerge from the conference. And my caution is that if it is a legally binding document, then how will it relate to an existing climate change treaty?
You have raised this issue of whether we will stick with the UNFCCC framework, which has so far informed all these negotiations, or whether there is a possibility that under pressure from the US or whoever, whether we shift from the fundamental principles.
So, as I said,
contained in the UNFCCC framework.
We already have a climate change treaty, which is the UNFCCC. It has certain principles and provisions.
Okay.
If you have a new climate change treaty, then obviously for future actions, it is this new treaty which will be the template.
Okay.
That means the UNFCCC then recedes into the background.
So that's a danger.
Certainly, that's a danger in respect of what will be the new legal principles which will be incorporated in this treaty.
Okay.
That is why I said we should be a little careful, because whether the new treaty which is being proposed, will it, for example, have the principle of equity, which is fundamental to the UNFCCC?
Differentiated responsibilities for developed and developing countries.
Exactly. Will it have the, in the UNFCCC, developing countries have certain entitlements, in terms of finance, in terms of technology. Will those entitlements now be converted into obligations? That is, you also have an obligation to fund climate change action.
Okay.
Don't expect technology transfer.
Okay.
So, I think we have to wait and see what is the nature of the new document which is being suggested.
Mr. Shyam Saran, I had interviewed the Environment Minister last week, and he also seemed to suggest that India was willing to be part of a broader solution to climate change, and as opposed to the past when India was dubbed as a spoiler or
wrongly.
Wrongly.
So we should not concede the point that in the past we were obstructive and now we are not obstructive.
Dubbed by the West.
Exactly.
I'm not saying as dubbed in the past, and he recognized this. The minister said that in the past the West has dubbed us as spoilers. So therefore, we proactively have also given our commitments, voluntary commitments. Now, he was a bit surprised that on the eve of the climate change negotiations, there was criticism coming from the US, especially from Kerry, who kind of criticized India for its continued dependence on coal for energy, and he said it was not the right direction, which you also mentioned in your article. And the minister said that the United States was probably the largest producer of coal-based power. So how do we deal with these contradictions?
No,
because all these things,
I think as negotiators we should be very clear that a lot of pressure will be brought upon India and other countries in order to sort of press them to be aligned more with the Western position. So I take that as a given. That there will be pressures brought in. They will use mass media. They will use statements like what John Kerry made. It doesn't worry me too much as long as we don't get spooked by that in a sense.
Okay.
We should determine what our interests are, and we should go along with those interests rather than be influenced by what John Kerry is saying or what anybody else is saying. Now, as far as the Paris negotiations are concerned, I think there are 2 or 3 things. One, I mentioned the legal nature of the document because that's very fundamental, not because of what happens at Paris, but because it will set the template for all future action.
you set the agenda for the next 10 years. Yeah.
Exactly, 10 years or even more, because we are talking about targets here for 2030.
2030, yeah.
Okay, so we have to be very careful that we do not sign on to something which will constrict our developmental space as we go along, trying to deal with the challenge of climate change, but also making certain that our development prospects are preserved.
Okay.
Now, with regard to issues such as coal, it is very important that India's ability to continue using coal for the foreseeable future, that is not constricted, because alternatives available to us are very few.
Yeah. And if they are, they are very costly.
They are costly. The world is not taking cognizance of the fact that even though we are a large user of coal, we are one of the few countries which has put a tax on coal. And in fact, the tax on coal has been progressively increasing to 200 rupees per ton now.
Yeah.
That's 10% of the running mine cost of coal, which is quite an important measure. And that cess on coal is being used to fund renewable energy, clean energy through the Clean Energy Fund. Now, very few countries have done important things like this. Or we have a clean coal mission, where we are actually working on technology to make sure that the efficiency of coal burning will be 48%, 49%. The emissions will be much lower, what is known as ultra supercritical technology. 2017 onwards, we will not be making any subcritical coal-based thermal power plants anymore.
Okay.
So, we are doing a great deal.
So, we have a path for moving away from coal also.
Exactly. And so, we have done more in that respect than many Western countries have.
The US is the largest producer of coal-based power. Of late, they have shifted because of shale gas. They have discovered
Well, the largest producer of coal-based power is China today. But yes, you are right that today, the US produces more power from coal than India does.
Sorry,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yes, there is a decline in the proportion of the use of coal in the United States for power, but that is being made possible because of shale gas, which is very affordable. But please don't forget that you are moving from one fossil fuel to another fossil fuel. We are moving from fossil fuel to renewable energy.
So, there's a difference.
Yes, I don't think that people are really fully appreciating the kind of effort that India is making in terms of climate change action, and then to turn around and say, well, India is not really pulling its weight, India is not stepping up to the plate. I think this is completely misplaced.
We'll take a small break here. Please don't go in. Keep watching RST. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Mr. Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary, as also Chief Negotiator on climate change in the UPA regime. Mr. Shyam Saran, now let's focus a bit on the equity principle, which is embedded in the UNFCCC framework, and in some ways invoking that equity principle. Prime Minister Narendra Modi yesterday in his address on the sidelines of the Paris conference said that it is public purpose which should drive green technologies, use of green technology, rather than market incentive. Now, this also goes back to this whole question of the climate fund, the promised climate fund of $100 billion from 2020 onwards, every year $100 billion, as also treating emerging green technologies as public goods and to be shared with the world on an equitable basis. Now, how do you see this evolving from these negotiations?
So, I am extremely happy that the Prime Minister stressed the importance of there being as I said, a global collaborative response, and that we should not treat this as a kind of a market opportunity. Rather, we should treat this as a global emergency, which requires us to set aside market principle and work on the basis of global public goods. So, from that point of view, the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, which is embedded in the UNFCCC, needs to be retained. In whatever outcome document comes out, that principle is absolutely fundamental.
The spirit should be retained. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very, very, very important. Because what we are saying is that all of us have to make an effort to deal with this challenge. So it is not that you have caused this problem, you go and fix it. What we are saying is, even though you may have caused this problem, the responsibility to fix it is a collective responsibility.
Okay.
But that collective responsibility can only be on the basis of equitable burden sharing. So that is fundamental. It should not be that the developed countries try to shift the burden of adjustment onto the shoulders of the developing countries. So what we spoke about coal is a very classic example.
Yeah.
If we have to get away from coal, then you must enable me to get away from coal. Help me, in fact, do more than I am already doing with my own resources.
Sure.
I am not saying that I will not do anything. I am doing quite a great deal. In fact, I am doing much more than you.
Yeah.
But I am also entitled to support in terms of finance, in terms of technology, if I have to do more than what I am able to do myself.
Yeah.
So that principle is very, very important. And as far as the technology aspect is concerned, if we are facing a global emergency, if the French president said in very eloquent terms that this is now a tipping point, you know, we are now reaching a point where the survival of humanity itself may be in question. If that is the kind of emergency we are facing, then how can we say that as far as climate friendly technologies are concerned, the intellectual property, you know, that is sacrosanct, that must not be touched.
Yeah.
You know, so there has to be some adjustment with respect to the principle of protecting intellectual property. And beyond that, I think something like what the Prime Minister already has, you know, I think again a very important initiative, which is the International Solar Alliance. The principle behind that is, how do the nations of the world get together, bring their best minds, bring their own resources together in order to ensure that solar energy, which today is a supplemental source of energy, it is a marginal source of energy, how can we make it into a mainstream source of energy as early as possible? Because that is, sun is the source of all energy.
But tell me, is there a possibility that public purpose and market incentive could be blended in a way that both are there and neither is compromised, in the sense that if you have a climate fund of say $100 billion, there is a proposal, in fact, or there is a thinking which India is also supporting, that this fund could actually finance new technologies, and royalties could be paid out of those.
We have this even at the Copenhagen summit.
So in a way, it becomes a public good.
Yes, we have already made this.
And the private sector is incentivized to do research on that.
This has already been put forward by India and by other developing countries, that you can use, you know, UN funding to purchase or to lease, you know, climate friendly technologies and make them available in as wide a manner as possible. You charge countries which are able to pay a certain amount of money. For the least developed countries, don't charge anything.
Sure.
So this proposal has already been made, but this has never been positively responded to by the developed countries, because they see this as some kind of a market opportunity for their companies. Now that is the approach that to us seems you are trying to, in a sense, profit from a natural you know, emergency, rather than, you know, banding together, working together, collaborating together to meet this climate. You cannot say that this is an extraordinary, you know, challenge to humanity, and your response to that would be only a market response. Market response is part of the solution. Market response cannot be the entire solution.
So essentially what you're saying is that green technologies which are being evolved to save Mother Earth cannot be totally profit driven, right?
No, it cannot be profit driven, even if there are technologies which have emerged from the private sector and are proprietary technologies, we are not even saying that you punish them by taking away their technology without paying them proper
You give them their due through this climate fund.
Through an international mechanism. Why should there be a problem in creating an international mechanism which makes that possible? You see, we have also in the past met similar kind of emergencies, maybe not the same scale, by in fact accepting this principle. After all, the Montreal Protocol to deal with the ozone layer worked on that principle.
Mr. Saran, you were the chief negotiator for India at the Copenhagen meet. The same issue was raised there, and similar, this whole question of climate fund, green technologies be treated as public good. Now, tell us something about when you speak to the negotiators in the US or Europe. Why do they resist this framework of treating these technologies as public goods? Why do they do it? Is it that there's too much pressure from the multinationals there on their governments not to look at this narrative, or what?
Well, I mean, partly it must be that kind of pressure, but also I think there is almost like an ideological principle, that intellectual property is something sacrosanct and you must not touch it. You see the same thing with pharmaceuticals.
Sure.
We have faced this problem with respect to pharmaceuticals.
There's a lot of cussedness
well
on pharmaceuticals also.
So my sense is that particularly after the global financial and economic crisis, the Western economies, number one, they faced a tremendous amount of economic pressure. The kind of money that could have been made available for these kind of purposes, multilateral, institutions, maybe that also shrank. The sense of, being under kind of a siege because of the continuing economic decline of these countries vis-a-vis some of the emerging countries, that created a sense that we are losing competitiveness. So in that kind of an atmosphere, it is easy to see why there should be resistance, to any kind of concession with respect to either intellectual property or funding as well. Now, you spoke about, $100 billion fund, climate fund. But it was to be put in place by 2020, not for the future. Now, hardly any money has come with respect to
less than $10 billion.
Yes, exactly. So how are you going to actually fund climate change action by developing countries, even if you say keep India out of it, keep some of the major emerging economies out of it. Even for the rest, this is simply not enough. See, so this is something which is, to my mind, it is already something which was there, that there was not much of a willingness to actually put money in for this kind of purpose. After the global economic and financial crisis, in fact, that willingness has shrunk even more.
Do you think, Mr. Saran, do you think there could be some new idea such as, global GDP, for instance, is upward of $75 trillion, $80 trillion. Do you think there could be a small cess on global GDP? Well, and that can be used.
There are many.
You could create a climate fund based on a cess on global GDP.
Yes, well, I mean, there have been various ideas put forward like that. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the French president even suggested some kind of a global tax on carbon that could fund the climate change action. So there are several ideas like this. The question is whether most of the important countries, are they willing to accept this? And secondly, again, the question of equity will come. Who will pay what?
Who will pay what? Yeah.
See, so are you willing to accept the principle that those who have more should contribute more?
Yeah.
That particular principle has to be accepted, has to be kept upfront. India should also contribute. My view is that India should also contribute. We are not looking for a free ride, but I think the principle of equitable burden sharing, this is something fundamental to any international regime. It's not only a question of climate. Even if you are looking at other international regime, they also need to be based on the principle of equity, otherwise they will not work. If they are not seen as fair, if they are not fair, countries will find ways of not complying with them. So I think it is very important that whatever emerges out of Paris, whether it is a legal document or it is not a legal document, at least the principle of equitable burden sharing should be the bedrock of any kind of agreement that.
So you're saying that the principle of the equity principle cannot be compromised at all?
No, it cannot be,
And
because
do you think this
your ability to meet a global challenge
Yeah.
is dependent upon equity.
Exactly.
If people are saying, look, we are facing a global emergency, so let us set aside the equity principle, all of us have to make an effort. I would say all of us have to make an effort, but that effort will be effective only if it is based on the principle of equity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shyam Saran, for talking to us. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.